Hello, everybody, and thank you for tuning in to the Liberty Report. With me today is Daniel McAdams, our co-host, and Daniel, good to see you.
How are you this morning, Dr. Paul?
Doing very well,
Good.
and we have a few things to contend with right now, and we haven't solved all the problems yet, so we're going to continue to plug along. But yesterday our president, issued an executive order. That always makes me nervous because I think about 99% of executive orders are probably unconstitutional because they're doing all kinds of things. And I would put yesterday's executive order in that category. If some people say, well, he's doing such and such because the Congress gave him the authority to do it. But if the Congress doesn't have the authority to change the Constitution and let the president write the law, so I have a real problem with that. But the executive order yesterday is dealing with the very precarious situation in the southern hemisphere, and that is Venezuela. We've been on with sanctions there. We worked real hard for a coup. We wanted to throw Maduro out. It didn't work. And we have put a lot of sanctions on that country, a lot of suffering, but just like every place else, whether it's Cuba or Iraq, they never work. And I think there's a couple things. I already addressed the subject of constitutionality. I don't think the issuing of executive orders like this are constitutional. But another thing that we should consider probably more often, because I think it makes the whole issue of liberty, involved in the principle of morality. Where's the moral authority come from people to do all these things? Oh, well, we have a dictator in Venezuela, and they're not doing well, and their economy is weak. So we have to take care of the children. So we're going to go in and throw out one president and put in and pick another one, unelected, and just install them and say that we're going to have regime change. So I think that is not only illegal and immoral. I think it's over the top. And if they won't listen to anything I've just said, I don't know why they just wouldn't listen to themselves by looking at their past performances, and it's total failure. And so now they want to put on more sanctions, and the evidence is loud and clear that the people who suffer most are the children and the citizens, not the government, and they don't work. And yet they continue to do this because they argue the case, which obviously isn't true, that if we really punish the people, they admit they need to punish some people because they'll get angry and then they will throw the dictator out that we don't like. The whole thing is, it brings people together. It solidifies the support for the bad guys. So the whole system is bad, and here it's accelerating, and I don't think it looks good because this is real punishment against more people. And as we point out in the title, children are going to suffer, and the excuse is, we're doing it for humanitarian reason. And anybody who objects to that, and we've already received criticism, that means that you are not a humanitarian because he's a bad dictator. But they never question the authority, where it comes from, and who the substitute is. Is the substitute a legal authority, that should become the president because we said so? So I think this is a mess. I think we've contributed to it a lot. If we just would spend 1/10 the time and energy trying to teach people what liberty is all about and how markets work, I think we'd be a lot better off than just threatening people and carelessly and casually putting on sanctions when they don't work, just add on.
And it's been 4 months since this comical coup with Guaido. Guaido was named not by the Venezuelan people, by Mike Pence, named him president. He had this ridiculous coup in April that no one supported. He has no support. He had no support for it. So it failed miserably all over the place. Instead of just giving up, the U.S. just giving up and saying, you know what, this is not working. We're going to let these people sort it out their own way. No, they double down. They always double down on a bad bet. And as you pointed out, actually, there was a poll in June showing that Maduro's support had increased since the coup. And it always happens that way. So yesterday, the White House, President Trump, issued an executive order blocking the property of the government of Venezuela. Essentially what this is an embargo, which is an act of war. It's an international act of war. We're not ready for that yet. And essentially, it's an act of war. So what the statement says is it authorizes the Secretary of Treasury in consultation with the Secretary of State to impose sanctions on persons who provide support to Nicolas Maduro and his illegitimate regime. So that means not only going after the government, but anyone, including Americans, anywhere who supports him. What does that word support mean?
Well, it means whatever they want it to mean. But they do want to grab the moral high ground, and they want to give an explanation because they're not bad guys who want to go in and take over these countries and issue these executive orders and punish the people. It's human rights violations, and that's the reason they do it, because they want to protect human rights. Maduro has usurped too much power, as if that hasn't ever happened in this country. Already been complaining about our executive branch has usurped power and our legislative branch has given up on it. And most of the time, and I'm sure it's been mentioned in Venezuela, drug dealers. There's probably drug dealers there, and they're bad people. We have to stop them. But they don't mention the commodity called oil.
Yeah.
I wonder if oil has anything to do with this. They don't say, well, we have to, I think some of them are ridiculous enough. Some of them would say, yeah, we got to go in there and protect our oil.
Yeah.
But basically, that's not the reason they admit that we're going there. But oil has a lot to do with it. I think the empire has a lot to do with it, and various nature. And the endorsement or the understanding that we have a moral obligation. Not only do we have this moral obligation to throw out the bad guys, but we as the exceptional power of the world, we have this moral obligation to be the policeman, and they're not bashful for this because we are good people, and we're only going to export good ideas, freedom and liberty and constitutional. That's where the farce comes, because too many people buy into it, but most Americans will be lackadaisical, they don't care, or they say, oh, we're going down there for a good reason. But I think as time goes on, in the last 15 or 20 years, more and more Americans are waking up and just think there's a lot of people now that said, even Trump, that was a bad war, in the Middle East and Iraq and Afghanistan. But then once they get involved, they don't know how to get out of it. But this is making this situation worse, and that, of course, is the point of our program today: try to get people to realize that just putting on sanctions will do exactly opposite of what they're pretending to be doing.
Exactly, and you mentioned oil. Well, one of the first things the U.S. did is it seized Citgo, which is the Venezuelan state oil company. All of their assets in the U.S. They stole all that money and they gave it to Guaido. What happened right after they gave it to Guaido? He's found to be all kinds of corruption. Everyone around him is corrupt, stealing the money. So there you have that. And now we can put on, this is the White House statement on the new executive order. Here's what they say. The United States denounces the Maduro government for its continued gross abuses of human rights and repression. The Venezuelan people are fighting for freedom, their basic rights, and a return to the rule of law. Down a little bit, as the administration makes clear, all options are on the table. We know what that means. So let's look at the second one. This is all about human rights. We're going to fix the human rights problem. Now take a look at this, Dr. Paul. This is a study done back a couple of months ago. 40,000 dead thanks to U.S. sanctions on Venezuela. So what about human rights? What about human rights when you have 40,000 civilians dying as a result of the ramped up sanctions in 2017? This is when they really ramped up. Bad situation already. Venezuela had a bad economy. So what do? We drove the screws in. 40,000 people died because of it. And then we said we're going to help them with their human rights.
And that is not a moral concern for the people who put on the sanctions, because they'll deny it. They say, oh no, it all is because Maduro wouldn't leave. They literally say, you do this, you must leave, and things will get much better. So they do that. But the president put on what they call the embargo, which just means more sanctions and more freezing of assets and more penalties and hurting the people. But they talked about a blockade, and a blockade is one step more, because that means nobody goes in or out of the country, and you have vessels out there, and you check every ship, and this is not imposed, but no options off the table, so that's always a possibility. And it is said, well, who's going to do that? Do you think NATO is going to send their ships down there? Do you think the European Union cares? They're going to go down and mess with this? No, it's going to be the naval. Even if it's in Europe or the Middle East, it's always us.
Yeah.
So, and then we wonder why people get a little bit annoyed with us. And I think that is just a mess. But they will say, well, if this doesn't work, we'll blockade them.
And then I wonder what will happen, because China and Russia are doing business with Venezuela. Are they going to shoot down a Russian plane? Are they going to blow up a Chinese ship? You know, it's absurd. But a lot of this whole thing, I think, is about Bolton. I'm not trying to give a pass to the president because the buck stops there. But Bolton, I think, is freelancing on this whole operation from the beginning. He's down in Lima right now meeting with the other U.S. compliant regimes down in South America, all the toadies down there. And he's saying that he gave a speech saying that U.S. authorities can target and sanction anyone, including foreigners, who support the Maduro government. They don't really say what support means. What does that mean? What is it if an American humanitarian, what if a doctor goes down and tries to help some of these people suffering? They're liable to end up in jail. Maybe they'll put us in jail for talking about it.
Well, because of our power and influence militarily and power of the financial system of the world, immediately when this was occurring, they had to show that we had support. And how many countries? 20-some countries?
50. No, 50.
50. Oh, that means we're really in charge. So they say, oh, yeah, we're with you, we're with you. And none of them probably wanted to. They didn't want to get involved in this thing, and they're not going to pay for it. They're going to just have more refugees coming through those countries, and they're going to come up to Mexico someplace and try to come here. But allies were more or less, they're threatened to join, because they all depend on us. I mean, we bail them out and help them, or we're liable to put sanctions on them. And the way the law is written, if they did start trading with them, we're going to put on sanctions. And you mentioned, what if there's real, true humanitarian aid that wants to come in? What if some churches wanted to go in and help some people? They're going to be in big trouble, and that will be prohibited. So they're doing exactly opposite of what we ought to be doing. It should be participation. People say, well, let's assume that Guaido was a pretty good guy.
Yeah.
I would still argue that it's not our obligation to go down and be involved in getting rid of Maduro. But the big question is does that mean that you and I can't go down there if we don't want? No, I as a congressman, I don't have the right to hire your kids or draft your kids or send the kids down there to be exposed or tax you or somebody else. But my idea of a free society, when there seems to be a more legitimate, problem where somebody is outrageously bad, I think you can go down. We're not going to stop you, because right now that is not the case. But and they never apply this approach when there's a government slightly bigger than the government of Venezuela. When you look at all the Middle East, they're not going to do it with a country that has an army that may retaliate. We're not going to. We try it, but it's not going to be achievable with China. But they're working on that, and they're working on probably a military conflict with China at the rate we're going.
Yeah, at the rate we're going. Here's a question that nobody really likes to ask, but it's a legitimate question. What about all of the Maduro supporters in Venezuela? We've seen the rallies. It doesn't matter what you think about him or them or anyone. We've seen the rallies. It's obvious. Who knows how much percentage or whatever. We've seen hundreds of thousands of people in the street rallying for him. He didn't hold a gun to each of their heads and force them to go down there. They genuinely support them. Why does their voice not matter? Why does Pence, Bolton, and Trump's voice on who's the president matter more than the people who were there who want to have this person in power? There's this sense that, everyone wants him gone. Well, it's not true. So who gets to say? What's the morality of that? The whole thing about if you're a doctor going down, well, the U.S. government is acting like the authoritarian. We're attacking this authoritarian Maduro by telling an American if you go down to help these people, you're going to end up in jail.
Well, the simple answer, and a little bit flippant, but maybe there's some truth in it, it's all about oil and empire.
Yeah.
Power and empire and our control, and I definitely think that the oil has a lot to do with it. But, this could linger for a long time. Look how long we've done this to Cuba, and with zero results, zero benefits. Even when the Castros lose this clout that they have, we continue with the same policies, no matter how many Cubans would like to, have more freedom and come to the United States and work more with us. But I guess time will do it, but it's such a shame that it lasts so long, and that I think the one point we're trying to make here is, if we gave them the benefit of the doubt completely, that they're acting with good intentions, which we question, that they're hurting the very people they claim they're helping. And that to me should be a moral problem and creating a moral crisis. But in politics, you don't think of it in terms of morality, except when you're trying to justify something that you're doing that is wrong. Oh yes, it's a moral obligation on us to go in there and get rid of a dictatorship, instead of using, do we have a moral concern about not starving kids from our bombing and our sanctions?
Yeah, exactly. Well, here's Bolton in Lima, the tough guy. The time for dialogue is over. Now is the time for action. Maduro is at the end of his rope, almost as if he's the commander-in-chief. Doesn't it sound like that? He's declaring war. The thing that I wonder about, and if the president were listening, I would say, you got to watch these guys. He's freelancing. Think about the political fallout of what he's doing. This is going to go into election season. This is an open, festering wound that the neocons have opened up. It's oozing all over the place, and it's going to fester. And if the Democrats had any brains, they would repeat this over and over. Look what you've done. Look what you've done. Look at the people suffering. This is a real liability for the president. You got to do something about these freelancing neocons, unless you agree with them. That's up to you. But we will be coming to town, and this is one of the issues that's going to be at the top of the agenda to talk about on August 24th. Got to get your tickets and be there. There's going to be great speakers. Douglas McGregor, you've seen him on Tucker Carlson. You've seen David Stockman all over the place. Lou Rockwell, Ron Paul. So many others are going to be there. This is the topic. RonPaulInstitute.org/conference. More info and tickets. We want to see you in a couple of weeks. Dr. Paul?
Very, very good. The issue here is so much is getting information out, because in time took care of changing people's attitude about Iraq and Afghanistan. At first, the American people are hesitant. They don't want to go to war. The propagandists get busy, the military-industrial complex and the media lambast and say how evil these people are, and we have this moral obligation for human rights in these countries, and we have to go in and save the people. And then we go in, and a lot of people die, and a lot of our liberties are removed in the process, and the countries are not helped at all. And we continue to do this, and then we take a poll 10 years later and say, it was all a big mistake. We should have never done it, including that was one of Trump's arguments to win the election. We made a mistake. We shouldn't be doing this. We should get out of that mess. But then we go back and we do the same thing again, and we make this justification. So here we are, once again, accelerating the penalties on the Venezuelan people and saying, well, we're getting rid of the bad people. Why is it that we have to wait another 10 or 15 years when the history of Cuba is written, and it started to be written, that the embargo and sanctions against Cuba really never helped? And there was a time in the Cold War when missiles were there was an obligation for us to do something. But ultimately, all these years of sanctions, totally unnecessary. So how long is it going to take if this process continues in Venezuela? Maybe a long time, except if the people could only be informed as well today about the foolishness of this and what it will lead to, and not have to wait until you look back and say, oh boy, 70% of the American people think that war in Iraq and Afghanistan and Syria, it never made any sense and we shouldn't have gone in there. So that is one of our goals here, is try to get the information out so the American people can make a better judgment on it rather than waiting and listening to the propagandists. And that is a big job, but we feel obligated to do it, and actually I feel pretty good that we do reach people. No, not massively. We don't have millions of people, saying, oh boy, we really agree with you. But a lot of very significant people do, and that is why we have our conferences, and they're very successful, and we have some very important people who speak there, and a lot of people that come. All the people who come are very significant and are thoughtful people who will spread the message of liberty. And they will also fully endorse the principles of a non-interventionist foreign policy, which is the only foreign policy that can lead to peace and prosperity. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.